The airport buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to their gates, dragging suitcases, and juggling coffee cups. Among the crowd was a young black woman, quietly waiting in line to board her flight. She was dressed comfortably, her headphones resting around her neck, and her carry-on bag slung over one shoulder. She had been looking forward to this trip for weeks, a chance to visit family she hadn't seen in months. The line moved slowly, but she didn't mind. She was used to waiting, life had taught her patience. When it was finally her turn, she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, who smiled and wished her a pleasant flight. She made her way down the jet bridge, the familiar hum of airplane engines growing louder as she approached the plane. Inside, the cabin was a mix of organized chaos, flight attendants directing passengers, overhead bins snapping shut, and the low murmur of conversations. She found her seat, a window spot near the middle of the plane, and settled in. It wasn't first class, but it was comfortable enough for the few hours she'd be in the air. As she stowed her bag and buckled her seatbelt, she noticed a man a few rows ahead arguing with a flight attendant. His voice was loud, his tone demanding. She couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but his body language was aggressive, arms waving, face red. The flight attendant, a calm and professional woman, was doing her best to defuse the situation, but the man wasn't having it. Eventually, he stormed off toward the back of the plane, muttering under his breath. The young woman sighed and leaned her head against the window. She hoped the rest of the flight would be uneventful. But just as the thought crossed her mind, the man from earlier appeared in the aisle beside her. He was older, with graying hair and a stern expression. He looked down at her, then at the seat next to her, which was empty. "This is my seat," he said abruptly, pointing to the empty spot. She blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "I said, this is my seat. I need you to move." She glanced at her boarding pass, then at the seat number above her. "I think there's been a mistake. This is my seat, 12B. You must be in the wrong row." The man's face hardened. "I don't make mistakes. Now move." The young woman felt a knot form in her stomach. She wasn't sure what to do. She didn't want to cause a scene, but she also didn't want to give up her seat for no reason. Before she could respond, a flight attendant appeared, sensing the tension. "Is everything okay here?" the flight attendant asked, her voice calm but firm. The man turned to her, his tone sharp. "This woman is in my seat. I need her to move." The flight attendant glanced at the young woman, who held up her boarding pass. "I'm in 12B. This is my seat." The flight attendant took the boarding pass and checked it, then looked at the man. "Sir, this is her assigned seat. If there's an issue with your seating, I'd be happy to assist you, but she's in the correct spot." The man's face turned red, and his voice rose. "This is ridiculous. I paid for this seat, and I'm not moving until she does." By now, other passengers were starting to notice the commotion. Heads turned, and whispers filled the cabin. The young woman felt her face grow hot. She didn't want to be the center of attention, but she also didn't want to back down. She had every right to be in that seat. The flight attendant, still calm, placed a hand on the man's arm. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but I need you to lower your voice. We'll figure this out, but causing a scene isn't helping anyone." The man jerked his arm away. "Don't touch me. I'm not the one causing a scene, she is." He pointed accusingly at the young woman, who felt a surge of anger but stayed silent. The flight attendant took a deep breath, her professionalism unwavering. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step into the galley with me so we can resolve this without disturbing the other passengers." The man hesitated, then finally nodded, shooting one last glare at the young woman before following the flight attendant. As they walked away, the young woman let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, some sympathetic, others curious. She stared out the window, trying to steady her nerves. A few minutes later, the flight attendant returned, this time with a male colleague. They approached the young woman, their expressions apologetic. "Ma'am, we're so sorry for the inconvenience," the female flight attendant said. "We've resolved the issue, and you're more than welcome to stay in your seat. If you need anything during the flight, please don't hesitate to let us know." The young woman nodded, grateful but still shaken. "Thank you," she said quietly. As the flight attendants walked away, she couldn't help but wonder what had just happened. Why had the man been so insistent? And why had he targeted her? She didn't have answers, but she knew one thing for sure: this was going to be a flight she'd never forget. The plane began to taxi toward the runway, and the young woman closed her eyes, trying to push the incident out of her mind. But as the engines roared to life and the plane lifted off the ground, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a story that would leave everyone on that flight, and beyond, stunned. As the plane climbed higher into the sky, the cabin settled into a quiet hum. The soft whir of the engines and the occasional ding of the seatbelt sign were the only sounds breaking the silence. The young woman by the window tried to relax, but her mind kept replaying the confrontation. She glanced around the cabin, noticing how most passengers had already moved on, some reading, others dozing off, a few tapping away on their devices. Life on the plane had returned to normal, but for her, the tension still lingered. A few rows behind her, the man who had caused the scene sat with his arms crossed, his face set in a hard frown. He occasionally shot glances toward her direction, his expression unreadable but intense. The young woman caught one of his looks and quickly turned away, focusing on the clouds outside her window. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten under her skin. About halfway through the flight attendant who had intervened earlier approached her with a warm smile. She crouched slightly in the aisle, speaking in a low, kind voice. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I know that wasn't easy back there." The young woman nodded, appreciating the gesture. "I'm okay. Just confused, I guess. I don't understand why he was so upset." The flight attendant sighed softly. "Some people just have a hard time accepting when things don't go their way. It wasn't about you, it was about him. You handled it with a lot of grace, and I want you to know that we're here to support you." The young woman felt a small wave of relief. "Thank you. That means a lot." The flight attendant patted her arm gently. "If you need anything, just let us know. We're here to make sure you have a comfortable flight." As the flight attendant walked away, the young woman felt a little lighter. It was comforting to know that someone had her back. She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes and trying to let go of the stress. But just as she was starting to relax, she heard a commotion a few rows behind her. The man was standing in the aisle again, this time arguing with another passenger. His voice was loud, and his gestures were aggressive. "You're in my way," he barked, glaring at a middle-aged man who was trying to get to the restroom. The other passenger held up his hands defensively. "I'm just trying to get through, sir. No need to get upset." But the man wasn't having it. "You're all the same, no respect for anyone else," he snapped, his voice carrying through the cabin. The flight attendants rushed over, trying to calm the situation. "Sir, please take your seat," one of them said firmly. "You're disturbing the other passengers." The man turned on them, his face red with anger. "I'm not the problem here. Everyone else is." By now, the entire cabin was watching. Passengers exchanged worried glances, and a few whispered to each other. The young woman felt her heart race. She didn't want to get involved, but she couldn't help feeling a sense of dread. Something about the man's behavior felt off, like he was looking for a fight. The flight attendants managed to get him to sit down, but the tension in the cabin was palpable. The young woman noticed how people avoided eye contact with the man, as if afraid to set him off again. She couldn't blame them, he seemed unpredictable, and no one wanted to be his next target. As the flight continued, the young woman found herself glancing over her shoulder more often than she'd like. She told herself she was being paranoid, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still watching her. Every time she looked, though, he was either staring straight ahead or muttering to himself. It was unsettling, to say the least. About an hour before landing, the flight attendants began preparing the cabin for descent. They moved through the aisles, collecting trash and reminding passengers to fasten their seatbelts. When the female flight attendant reached the young woman's row, she paused and gave her a reassuring smile. "We'll be landing soon," she said. "You've been really brave. Just hang in there a little longer." The young woman nodded, grateful for the encouragement. "Thank you. I'm just ready for this flight to be over." The flight attendant chuckled softly. "I think we all are. But you've handled everything with a lot of strength. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." As the plane began its descent, the young woman felt a mix of relief and anxiety. She was eager to get off the plane and put the whole ordeal behind her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite over. The man's behavior had been too strange, too intense, to just be a random outburst. She didn't know what his problem was, but she had a feeling it wasn't just about a seat. When the plane finally touched down, the cabin erupted into applause, a common occurrence on flights that had been particularly stressful. The young woman joined in, though her applause was more out of relief than celebration. As the seatbelt sign turned off and passengers began gathering their belongings, she stayed in her seat, waiting for the crowd to thin out. She didn't want to risk running into the man again. But as she stood to retrieve her bag from the overhead bin, she felt a presence behind her. She turned, and there he was, the man, standing too close, his eyes locked on hers. Her heart skipped a beat, but she held her ground. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he said, his voice low and menacing. She didn't respond, her mind racing. Before she could react, the flight attendant appeared, stepping between them. "Sir, it's time to exit the plane," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. The man glared at her, then at the young woman, before finally turning and walking away. The young woman let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she grabbed her bag. The flight attendant placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. The young woman nodded, though she didn't feel okay at all. "I just want to get out of here." The flight attendant guided her toward the front of the plane, shielding her from any further interaction with the man. As they stepped off the plane and into the terminal, the young woman felt a wave of relief wash over her. But as she glanced back at the gate, she couldn't help but wonder if this was really the end, or if the man's anger would follow her even after the flight. The young woman hurried through the terminal, her carry-on bag bumping against her side as she walked. The airport was bustling with people, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still replaying the man's words and the intensity in his eyes. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why had he targeted her? And why had he been so determined to make her feel small? She found a quiet corner near a row of seats and pulled out her phone, her hands still trembling slightly. She texted her family to let them know she had landed safely, but she didn't mention what had happened on the plane. She didn't want to worry them, not yet. Instead, she took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. She was safe now, she told herself. The man was gone, and she'd never have to see him again. But as she made her way toward baggage claim, she couldn't help glancing over her shoulder. The airport was crowded, and every time someone brushed past her, her heart skipped a beat. She told herself she was being paranoid, but the encounter on the plane had left her on edge. When she reached baggage claim, she spotted the flight attendant who had helped her earlier. The woman was standing near the carousel, chatting with a colleague. When she noticed the young woman, she excused herself and walked over. "Hey," the flight attendant said, her voice warm and reassuring. "How are you holding up?" The young woman managed a small smile. "I'm okay. Just, still a little shaken, I guess." The flight attendant nodded sympathetically. "I don't blame you. That was a lot to deal with. But you handled it really well." "Thanks," the young woman said. "I just keep wondering why he was so intense. It didn't feel like it was just about the seat." The flight attendant's expression grew serious. "I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've seen all kinds of behavior. Some people just have a lot of anger, and they look for any excuse to take it out on others. It's not fair, and it's not right, but it happens. The important thing is that you stood your ground. You didn't let him intimidate you." The young woman nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. "I just hope I never have to deal with something like that again." The flight attendant gave her a reassuring smile. "You're stronger than you think. And if you ever need to talk about it, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to support you." As the flight attendant walked away, the young woman felt a small sense of comfort. It was nice to know that someone understood what she had gone through. But as she waited for her luggage, she couldn't help feeling a lingering sense of unease. When she finally had her bag, she made her way toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open, and she stepped out into the cool evening air. Her family was supposed to pick her up, but as she scanned the curb, she didn't see their car. She pulled out her phone to call them, but before she could dial, she heard a voice behind her. "You." She froze, her heart pounding. Slowly, she turned around. It was him, the man from the plane. He was standing a few feet away, his eyes locked on hers. Her stomach churned, and she took a step back. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound strong. The man took a step closer, his expression dark. "You think you're better than me, don't you? You think you can just walk away like nothing happened?" The young woman's mind raced. She glanced around, looking for someone, anyone, who could help. But the curb was crowded with people loading luggage into cars, and no one seemed to notice what was happening. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice firmer now. "I didn't do anything to you." The man's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you're so clever. But you're not. You're just like all the others." Before she could respond, a car pulled up to the curb, and her family called out to her. Relief flooded through her as she turned and hurried toward the car. She didn't look back, but she could feel the man's eyes on her as she climbed into the back seat. As the car pulled away, her family chatted excitedly, asking about her flight and her trip. She forced a smile and answered their questions, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about the man and the way he had looked at her. It wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, something darker. She didn't know what his problem was, but she knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. And as the car drove away from the airport, she couldn't shake the feeling that the man's anger would follow her, no matter how far she went. The car ride home was a blur. The young woman sat in the back seat, staring out the window as her family chatted around her. She nodded and smiled at the right moments, but her mind was elsewhere. The man's face kept flashing in her thoughts, his sneer, his piercing eyes, the way he had loomed over her at the curb. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Why had he followed her? And why did it feel like he wasn't done with her yet? When they finally arrived at her family's house, she forced herself to focus on the warmth and familiarity of home. Her younger sibling ran up to hug her, and her parents asked if she was hungry after the long flight. She smiled and said she was fine, but the truth was, her appetite had vanished. All she wanted was to be alone for a moment, to process everything that had happened. Excusing herself, she went upstairs to the room she always stayed in when she visited. It was cozy and familiar, with soft blankets and photos of family vacations on the walls. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap, and took a deep breath. For the first time since the flight, she allowed herself to really think about what had happened. It wasn't just about the seat. She knew that now. The man's anger had felt personal, like he had a grudge against her specifically. But why? She had never seen him before in her life. She replayed the moments in her mind, the way he had demanded she move, the way he had glared at her, the way he had confronted her at the curb. It was as if he had been looking for a reason to target her. She pulled out her phone and hesitated for a moment before opening her social media apps. She rarely posted anything personal, but she wondered if the man had somehow found her online. Her accounts were private, though, and there was no sign of any strange messages or followers. Still, the thought made her uneasy. How far would someone like that go? Downstairs, she could hear her family laughing and talking. The sound was comforting, but it also made her feel guilty. She didn't want to ruin their evening by bringing up what had happened. They had been so excited for her visit, and she didn't want to dampen the mood. But at the same time, she couldn't keep it bottled up forever. After a few minutes, she decided to go back downstairs. Her family was in the kitchen, preparing a late dinner. Her mom looked up and smiled when she walked in. "Everything okay, sweetheart? You seemed a little quiet earlier." The young woman hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired from the flight." Her mom studied her for a moment, as if she could sense there was more to it. But she didn't press. "Well, dinner's almost ready. Why don't you sit down and relax?" The young woman sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She tried to focus on the conversation around her, but her mind kept drifting back to the man. She wondered if she should report what had happened to the airline or even the authorities. But what would she say? That a man had been rude to her on a flight and then stared at her at the airport? It didn't seem like enough to warrant any action. As the evening went on, she found herself glancing at the windows, half expecting to see the man's face staring back at her. She knew it was irrational, he had no way of knowing where she was, but the fear was still there, lingering in the back of her mind. When she finally went to bed that night, she lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but her thoughts were loud. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man's anger wasn't just about her. It was about something bigger, something darker. And as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but wonder if she'd ever really be free of it. The next morning, the young woman woke up feeling restless. The sunlight streaming through the curtains should have been comforting, but it did little to ease the knot in her stomach. She had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with shadowy figures and angry voices. As she got dressed, she tried to push the thoughts away, telling herself that the man was gone and she was safe. But deep down, she couldn't shake the unease. Her family had plans for the day, a trip to a nearby park for a picnic. She forced herself to smile and act normal, not wanting to worry them. As they packed the car with food and blankets, she kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the man lurking nearby. But the street was quiet, and she told herself she was being paranoid. The park was bustling with families and groups of friends enjoying the sunny weather. The young woman tried to relax as they spread out their picnic blanket under a large tree. The sound of children laughing and the smell of fresh grass helped to calm her nerves, at least for a little while. She sat cross-legged on the blanket, picking at the food her mom had packed, and tried to focus on the conversation around her. But as the afternoon wore on, she began to feel uneasy again. She couldn't explain it, it was just a feeling, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. She scanned the park, her eyes darting from one group of people to another. And then she saw him. He was standing near the edge of the park, partially hidden by a tree. It was the man from the plane. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly looked away, hoping he hadn't noticed her. But when she glanced back a moment later, he was gone. She told herself it was just her imagination, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But the feeling of dread stayed with her, growing stronger as the day went on. She tried to push it aside, to enjoy the time with her family, but it was no use. Her mind kept drifting back to the man and the way he had looked at her. When they finally packed up to leave, she couldn't wait to get back to the safety of the house. But as they walked to the car, she felt a hand on her arm. She turned, expecting to see one of her family members, but it was him, the man. He was standing right beside her, his grip tight on her arm. "You can't avoid me forever," he said, his voice low and menacing. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Let go of me," she said, her voice trembling. Her family turned, noticing the commotion. Her dad stepped forward, his expression stern. "What's going on here?" he demanded. The man released her arm and took a step back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Just having a friendly conversation," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Her dad glared at him. "I suggest you leave my daughter alone." The man smirked, but he didn't argue. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The young woman felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. She knew this wasn't over. As they drove home, her family asked what had happened. She hesitated, then told them everything: the confrontation on the plane, the encounter at the airport, and now this. Her parents listened in stunned silence, their faces filled with concern. "We need to report this," her dad said firmly. "This man is dangerous." The young woman nodded, but she couldn't help feeling a sense of dread. She didn't know what the man wanted, but she knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to stop. And as they pulled into the driveway, she couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Back at the house, the young woman's family gathered in the living room, the atmosphere heavy with concern. Her dad paced back and forth, his jaw tight, while her mom sat beside her on the couch, holding her hand. Her younger sibling, sensing the tension, stayed quiet, glancing between the adults with wide eyes. "We can't just let this go," her dad said, stopping mid-pace. "This man has harassed you multiple times now. It's not a coincidence, he's targeting you. We need to do something." The young woman nodded, though the thought of confronting the situation head-on made her stomach churn. I don't know what to do. I feel like no one will take it seriously. It's not like he's physically hurt me or made direct threats." Her mom squeezed her hand. "It doesn't matter. What he's doing is wrong, and it's making you feel unsafe. That's enough. We'll start by reporting it to the airline and the airport authorities. If he shows up again, we'll call the police." The young woman took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Okay. Let's do it." Her dad pulled out his phone and began searching for the airline's customer service number. While he made the call, her mom stayed by her side, offering quiet words of reassurance. The young woman appreciated their support, but she couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. It was as if the man had invaded not just her physical space but her sense of security, too. When her dad got off the phone, he looked both frustrated and determined. The airline said they'll look into it, but they can't do much without more evidence. They suggested filing a report with the airport security team and local police if it escalates. The young woman sighed. "So, we just wait for him to do something worse?" Her dad shook his head. "No. We're not waiting. We're going to the police station right now. Even if they can't do much yet, we'll have a record of what's happened. That way, if he does anything else, they'll have a paper trail." The young woman hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. Let's go." At the police station, they were met with a mix of professionalism and skepticism. The officer who took their statement listened carefully but seemed unsure how to proceed. "Without a direct threat or physical altercation, there's not much we can do," the officer explained. But we'll file a report and keep an eye out. If you see him again, call us immediately." The young woman felt a pang of frustration but tried to stay calm. "What if he's following me? What if he shows up at my family's house?" The officer leaned forward, his tone more serious. "If you feel unsafe, we can increase patrols in your area. But for now, my advice is to stay alert and avoid being alone in public places. If he approaches you again, try to get to a safe place and call 911. As they left the station, the young woman felt a mix of relief and unease. At least there was a record of what had happened, but it didn't feel like enough. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still out there, watching, waiting. That evening, as the family sat down for dinner, the conversation turned to what they could do to stay safe. Her dad suggested installing security cameras around the house, and her mom offered to accompany her whenever she went out. The young woman appreciated their efforts, but she couldn't help feeling like her life had been turned upside down. Later, as she lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She thought about the man's face, his sneer, his piercing eyes. She thought about the way he had gripped her arm at the park, the way he had seemed to appear out of nowhere. She didn't know what he wanted, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let him control her life. With a deep breath, she made a decision. She wasn't going to live in fear. She was going to take back her sense of safety, no matter what it took. And as she closed her eyes, she felt a small spark of determination. Whatever happened next, she was ready to face it. The next few days passed in a blur of cautious routines. The young woman stayed close to home, avoiding public places unless accompanied by her family. Security cameras were installed around the house, and her dad made sure all the doors and windows were locked at night. She appreciated their efforts, but the constant vigilance was exhausting. She felt like a prisoner in her own life, and it was starting to wear on her. One afternoon, as she sat in the backyard trying to enjoy the sunshine, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the airline. Her heart raced as she opened it, hoping for some kind of resolution. But the message was vague and impersonal, stating that they had reviewed the incident and would take appropriate action if necessary. She sighed, frustrated. It felt like no one was taking her seriously. Her mom noticed her expression and sat down beside her. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" The young woman handed her the phone. "It's from the airline. They're not going to do anything." Her mom read the email and frowned. "I'm sorry. I know it's frustrating, but we're doing everything we can to keep you safe." "I know," the young woman said, her voice tinged with frustration. "But it feels like nothing is enough. I can't keep living like this, always looking over my shoulder." Her mom put an arm around her shoulders. "I understand. But remember, you're not alone in this. We're here for you, and we'll get through it together." The young woman nodded, though she still felt a knot of anxiety in her chest. She didn't want to burden her family, but she also didn't know how to move forward. She needed a plan, something that would help her feel in control again. That evening, she decided to do some research. She sat at her laptop, searching for advice on dealing with harassment and stalking. She read articles, watched videos, and even joined an online forum where people shared their experiences and strategies. The more she learned, the more she realized that she wasn't powerless. There were steps she could take to protect herself and regain her sense of security. One piece of advice stood out: documenting everything. If the man continued to harass her, having a detailed record of his actions could be crucial. She opened a new document and began typing, listing every encounter she'd had with him, from the plane to the park to the airport. She included dates, times, and as many details as she could remember. It was painful to relive those moments, but it also felt empowering. She was taking control of the situation, one step at a time. The next morning, she shared her plan with her family. "I've been doing some research," she said over breakfast. I think we should keep a record of everything that's happened. If he shows up again, we'll have evidence to show the police. Her dad nodded approvingly. That's a good idea. We'll help you with it. Her mom smiled. I'm proud of you for taking charge like this. It's not easy, but it's the right thing to do. The young woman felt a small sense of relief. For the first time in days, she felt like she was making progress. But as the day went on, the familiar unease crept back in. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still out there, watching, waiting. That afternoon, she decided to take a walk around the neighborhood with her mom. The fresh air and exercise helped clear her mind, and for a little while, she almost felt normal again. But as they turned the corner onto their street, she froze. There, standing near their house, was the man. Her heart pounded as she grabbed her mom's arm. It's him, she whispered. Her mom followed her gaze and immediately pulled out her phone. Let's go inside and call the police. But before they could move, the man spotted them. He started walking toward them, his expression unreadable. The young woman felt a surge of panic, but her mom stood firm, holding up a hand. Stay back, she said firmly. We've called the police. The man stopped, his eyes narrowing. I just want to talk, he said, his voice calm but unsettling. We don't want to talk to you, her mom replied, her voice steady. Leave us alone, or we'll have you arrested. The man hesitated, then smirked. You think you can stop me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Before he could say more, a police car pulled up to the curb. The young woman felt a wave of relief as two officers stepped out, their presence immediately shifting the dynamic. The man's smirk faded, and he took a step back. Is there a problem here? One of the officers asked, his tone authoritative. The young woman's mom quickly explained the situation, pointing to the man. He's been harassing my daughter, and now he's here, threatening us. The officers approached the man, who raised his hands in mock surrender. I wasn't doing anything wrong, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Just having a friendly conversation. The officers weren't amused. They asked for his ID and began questioning him, while the young woman and her mom stood nearby, watching nervously. After a few minutes, one of the officers came over to them. We're going to take him in for questioning, he said. We'll need you to come down to the station to give a statement. The young woman nodded, her heart still racing. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. The man's reign of intimidation was finally being challenged, and she was ready to face whatever came next. At the police station, the young woman and her family were ushered into a small room to give their statements. The officers were professional and empathetic, listening carefully as they recounted every detail of their encounters with the man. The young woman handed over the document she had prepared, feeling a small sense of pride as the officers reviewed it. This is very thorough, one of the officers said, nodding approvingly. It'll be a big help in building a case. The young woman felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the end of it. But as she sat in the sterile, fluorescent-lit room, she couldn't shake the feeling that the man's anger ran deeper than she had realized. There was something about the way he had looked at her, the way he had spoken, that made her think this wasn't just about her. It was about something bigger, something darker. After giving their statements, they were told to wait while the officers continued questioning the man. The minutes dragged by, each one feeling longer than the last. Her dad paced the room, his frustration evident, while her mom sat beside her, holding her hand. The young woman tried to stay calm, but her mind kept racing. What if the man was released? What if he came after her again? Finally, the door opened, and one of the officers stepped in. We've finished questioning him, he said. He's being held for now, but we'll need more evidence to press charges. In the meantime, we've issued a temporary restraining order. He's not allowed to come within 500 feet of you or your family." The young woman felt a mix of relief and frustration. The restraining order was a step in the right direction, but it didn't feel like enough. "What happens if he breaks it?" she asked. "If he violates the order, we can arrest him immediately," the officer explained. "But for now, this is the best we can do. I know it's not ideal, but it's a start." Her dad nodded, though he still looked uneasy. "Thank you for your help. We'll keep documenting everything, just in case." The officer handed them a copy of the restraining order and some additional resources for dealing with harassment. As they left the station, the young woman felt a strange mix of emotions. She was relieved that the man was being held accountable, but she also knew that this wasn't over. The restraining order was just a piece of paper, it couldn't erase the fear she still felt. That evening, back at the house, the family gathered in the living room to discuss their next steps. The young woman sat on the couch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, while her parents talked about increasing security measures. Her younger sibling, sensing the tension, stayed quiet, glancing between the adults with wide eyes. "We'll keep the cameras up and make sure the doors are always locked," her dad said. "And if you need to go anywhere, one of us will go with you." The young woman nodded, though she couldn't help feeling frustrated. She didn't want to live like this, always looking over her shoulder, always afraid. But she also knew that her family was doing everything they could to keep her safe. As the days passed, she tried to return to some sense of normalcy. She went for walks with her mom, spent time with her sibling, and even started working on a personal project she had put off for months. But the fear was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. Every time the doorbell rang or the phone buzzed, her heart would race, wondering if it was him. One afternoon, as she sat in the backyard reading, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the airline. She hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. But as she read the message, her eyes widened in surprise. The email stated that the airline had completed their investigation and had decided to ban the man from flying with them in the future. They also apologized for the distress he had caused and offered her a voucher for a future flight. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small victory. She showed the email to her family, who were equally relieved. "It's a step in the right direction," her mom said, smiling. "Maybe now he'll realize he can't get away with this kind of behavior." The young woman nodded, though she still felt uneasy. She didn't know if the man would stop, but she knew one thing for sure, she wasn't going to let him control her life anymore. She had taken steps to protect herself, and she would keep fighting if she had to. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about everything that had happened. It had been a terrifying experience, but it had also shown her how strong she could be. She had faced her fear, stood up for herself, and taken control of the situation. And as she closed her eyes, she felt a small spark of hope. Whatever happened next, she was ready to face it. The days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The young woman still felt the weight of what had happened, but it no longer consumed her every thought. The restraining order and the airline's decision to ban the man had given her a sense of security, though she knew she couldn't let her guard down completely. She continued to document everything, just in case, but the man hadn't tried to contact her or show up again. It felt like a small victory, but one she was grateful for. Her family remained vigilant, always making sure someone was with her when she left the house. The security cameras around their home provided an extra layer of protection, and the police had increased patrols in their neighborhood. It wasn't the way she wanted to live, but it was a necessary precaution, at least for now. One sunny afternoon, she decided to take a walk by herself for the first time in weeks. Her mom had offered to come with her, but she declined. "I need to do this on my own," she said, her voice firm but kind. Her mom hesitated, then nodded, understanding. As she walked through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, she felt a mix of emotions. The fresh air and the sound of birds chirping were soothing, but there was also a lingering sense of unease. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the man lurking nearby. But the streets were empty, and she told herself she was safe. When she reached the park, she sat on a bench under a large tree, watching the world go by. Families strolled past, children played on the swings, and a couple walked their dog. It was a peaceful scene, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of calm. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the tension in her shoulders melt away. As she sat there, she thought about everything she had been through. It had been a terrifying experience, but it had also shown her how strong she could be. She had faced her fear, stood up for herself, and taken control of the situation. She had learned to trust her instincts and to lean on the people who cared about her. And while she knew she couldn't erase what had happened, she also knew she didn't have to let it define her. When she returned home, her family was waiting for her, their faces filled with concern. "How was your walk?" her mom asked, her voice gentle. The young woman smiled. "It was good. I needed that." Her dad nodded, his expression softening. "I'm proud of you. You've handled all of this with a lot of strength." She felt a lump form in her throat but pushed it down. "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without you guys." That evening, as they sat down for dinner, the conversation was lighter than it had been in weeks. They talked about plans for the future, about trips they wanted to take and projects they wanted to start. The young woman felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready to face it. Later, as she lay in bed, she thought about the man. She didn't know where he was or what he was doing, but she hoped he had learned his lesson. She hoped he realized that his actions had consequences, and that he couldn't intimidate or harass people without facing the repercussions. But even if he hadn't, she knew she would be okay. She had taken back her power, and no one could take that away from her. As she closed her eyes, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead might not be easy, but she was ready to walk it. She had faced her fear, and she had come out stronger on the other side. And as she drifted off to sleep, she knew that whatever happened next, she would be ready to face it, head on, with courage and determination.